Welcome to a cozy week in the life of an author. This week I will be traveling to visit home in Romania, so you'll get to see how I try to balance work with travel and family. Keyword try. As you'll see, it was a little bit difficult. On Monday, very first thing, I started off by setting some ambiance with some LED candles. I used to very much love real candles until I realized inhaling those fumes is really not healthy for you, so I decided I will make the transition over to fake candles. I start every day with coffee and journaling. I do a season of life for maintaining emotional wellness and get it done for productivity planning and deciding what I'm going to do that week for work. After that, I packed what I'm bringing to Romania with me in terms of books. I'll be starting off by reading A Long Time Dead. Once I was done with all that, I wrote for a bit, then I made myself some breakfast. For breakfast, I usually have yogurt with cereal or granola and berries and just a couple of walnuts. And what I've been doing ever since moving to Europe is I've been using hand-picked walnuts from the yard and cracking them myself. It's just one tiny little way to slow down and have a more mindful life. That's so different from just grabbing a handful from a bag that you bought at the store. So on Monday, I wrote a total of about 2,000 words. I really got in the groove of my new gothic horror novel, which I'll tell you about in just a second. Hello everybody, welcome back to my very first, I want it to be like a cozy writing vlog. I'm going to show you a little bit about what I wrote every day this week and also just catch up because a lot has changed. So I moved to Europe. I'm currently in the process of trying to publish several books. I actually have 2 fully written manuscripts, and then I just started a third one this week, which I'm really excited about. And it's kind of strange because in this new home, it feels like nothing's real in terms of what I do for work. It feels like my content creation and my writing somehow are me just like playing house. Wait, I get to just do what I love every day? Like that, how's that real? And I can support myself from that. So it's been strange because it's the same stuff that I was doing in Seattle, except now for like half the cost of living, which is wonderful. So to tell you about these books, as you may or may not know, Curse in Their Veins was my debut novel about 2 sisters in Romania who discover that they're witches and also that there's a curse running through their bloodline that has to do with their grandmother and goes back millennia, and they have to use witchcraft to surmount the curse and also deal with family members and family narcissism and sort of sever the cycle of intergenerational trauma and the impact that it has on subsequent generations. So that came out in September of last year. In about February of this year, I finished my second novel, which the tentative name right now is A Song at Dead Man's Cove. It takes place in coastal Washington, and there are 2 POVs. There's a modern-day hotel concierge who works at a historic hotel that was once a Victorian mansion. And then there's a POV that takes place in the Victorian era of a woman who follows her husband, who's a lighthouse keeper, across the country. And she starts to get very lonely at the lighthouse and things get pretty weird. That one is more of like a classic gothic horror or maybe gothic suspense. It's not like super gory or anything like that. I would say the horror is more just paranormal, supernatural occurrences. And it draws from a Russian legend called the Rusalka, which is a water spirit of somebody who has died near a body of water and now wants vengeance on people who are around. That book is honestly at this point my favorite book that I've ever written, because there were a few that I wrote that I didn't publish as well, but this one is absolutely just a soul project for me. I feel so connected to it. I love it so much, and I'm just waiting for the go-ahead to publish it. I am still waiting on a few literary agents who requested the full manuscript, but I'm trying not to get my hopes up too high, so if they don't want it, it's this project that I really strongly believe in, and I probably will try to self-publish this one as well. And then the one that I wrote after that all takes place in modern times. It takes place in the southwestern desert of the United States. So it's about this girl who's a student taking a shower, and she gets a text from her friend. And when she tries to answer the text, she falls in the shower. And then she wakes up in bed. When she wakes up in bed, she doesn't remember how she got there. And she thinks that maybe she dreamed that she took a shower. But the same text as before soon rolls in, and she realizes that something weird is going on with her consciousness. And after that, she decides to study neuroscience because she wants to figure out what the hell is going on with her consciousness. She takes up these really fascinating research studies about the essence of consciousness, whether it can detach from the body and all this other stuff. And it has a pretty, I want to say, mind-fucking twist. I hope it's a twist that nobody sees coming. I hope that it's something that comes completely out of left field. This is a pretty pure psychological thriller, but it does have some speculative elements as well. So those two manuscripts are written. I haven't started querying literary agents for the one I just mentioned called The Splintered Parts, and that's because I've been waiting to see if I can get A Song at Dead Man's Cove represented first. And then I was thinking, if I can't get A Song at Dead Man's Cove represented, then I'll try to query The Splintered Parts next so that I can get both of them hopefully traditionally published by having a literary agent's representation. But when I was thinking about this on the plane ride to my move to Europe, I started just crying because I was so overwhelmed with wanting to publish A Song at Dead Man's Cove. Like I said, it is a project that I wholeheartedly believe in, and I want to get it out into the world. And I don't like this feeling of just sitting around knowing that I've written 2 entire novels in the past year, less than the past year, and I can't do anything with them because of how slow moving the publishing process is. So here's how things are going to go down from here. I'm going to wait on the literary agents that requested a full manuscript for A Song at Dead Man's Cove. If they offer me representation, great, that kind of solves all my problems. If not, I'm going to self-publish A Song at Dead Man's Cove. And it's had critique partners, it's had beta readers, but I would need to get it professionally edited if I go the self-publishing route. So that might take another couple months as well. And then I want to take a few months to really market this one ahead of time. And while I do that, I want to start querying the splintered parts. And at the same time, continuing this new novel that I just started, which is currently called The Labyrinth Beneath. The Labyrinth Beneath is about a woman in the 1700s in the Georgian era in Europe during the peak of the vampire hysteria who has just had a stillbirth and wants very badly to ensure that her next child is going to survive. And in order to ensure that, she finds herself face to face with somebody who can promise her that. Somebody who can promise her the guaranteed survival of her baby for something in exchange. But she doesn't know what that something in exchange is. So that's the premise. It's another gothic horror. And this one, honestly, it's like it gets really dark. Like from the very first page, this is very much the most horror-like book that I've ever written, so I hope that it's not too dark for mass consumption, but so far it's been going great. I mean, honestly, to tell you the truth, every time I write a novel, I can feel how my writing skills get better and better. Of course, that's kind of obvious, but still, it feels like in between one novel ending and another starting, there's like some sort of leap that takes place that really excites me. It's just frustrating waiting because, like I said, sometimes it feels like, what am I even doing with my life? How am I able to bring an income from just doing what I love, from just writing and recording videos every week? Like, how is that possible? I just need to keep reminding myself that, like, these projects are in the works. It just takes a really long time to get them out into the world, and also that I'm doing the same stuff I was doing overseas, just with a lot lower cost of living that actually makes this more feasible for me. Then on Tuesday, I had lots of errands to run before traveling home, so I wasn't able to focus as well as I would have liked on writing, but I did end up writing a total of 1,500 words. I'm pretty upset right now because my phone just straight up died on me. I don't mean that it ran out of battery. I mean that it died and will not wake up. I have the iPhone 12. I was just playing something while showering. I propped it up next to the shower, and after that it started acting weird, which doesn't really make sense because it's supposed to be waterproof or whatever, water protective, whatever they call it. But now it's irreparably dead, so this is kind of a good thing because I was gonna get a new European phone anyway, and I definitely need an iPhone 15 just for work to have like better quality videos and stuff. So I'm just gonna go do that. It's fine. Anyway, to tell you a little bit about what writing this most recent book has been like, in the debate about plotting versus pantsing, which if you're not familiar is basically, do you make outlines or not? Do you kind of wing your manuscripts or do you heavily plan out what you're going to write? Historically, I've always been of the opinion that I don't like to outline very much. I don't like to be sort of inhibited by the structure of it. And then with the splintered parts, the most recent book that I wrote, I did need to outline it because there was a lot of like neuroscience, quantum physics, astronomy in there that needed to all make sense in order for the twist to happen. And so with that, I was pretty systematic about plotting that out. And although I did deviate a little bit from the outline, and even if you do plot things out pretty strictly, the novel will always sort of take you in a slightly different direction. It was still pretty much what I had in mind from the get go. So, the first time that I reread that novel after I took a little bit of a break from it, I was thinking, well, like the pacing is actually pretty good. Like, I think having an outline and having that structure is really helpful for pacing. But what I'm realizing now as I work on The Labyrinth Beneath is, yeah, outlining could be good for pacing, but it's terrible for actually enjoying the act of writing. I'm going to be honest with you. The Splintered Parts was not the most fun book to write. I love it. I love all the things I've written because they're my babies, but it wasn't the most enjoyable. And I think a lot of that was because it was so structured that I felt like I need to stay within the confines of this very strict structure in order to make this happen. With the current book that I'm writing, I don't yet know exactly what's going to happen, and I was going to wait and like marinate on it a little bit longer before getting into it, but I wanted to just start, and I'm glad that I did because I feel like it's a lot more flowy. It's a lot more mindful, a lot more fun, kind of like playing jazz, like just spontaneously playing jazz rather than playing a song that's really structured, that has very specific notes. It's a lot more enjoyable to me. So, although I thought that I was going to become more of a plotter now, probably in the future, I'm going to go back to a little bit more unstructured. And the reason for that is that I don't want to sacrifice the beauty of writing for the final product. I can always go back and edit later, but there are just certain things that I would have never thought if I had plotted this. Let me give you an example. One of the characters in this novel is a baker. Her job of having a bakery just kind of came to me in the moment. It wasn't something I really thought at all about. And later, when I was thinking about some of the implications of her being a baker, I realized that there's something really cool that ties to a different aspect of the plot that could deepen the story. That would not have been possible if I had just sat down beforehand and thought of, what kind of job do I want this character to have? Because I probably would have picked something different, to tell you the truth. It wouldn't have come up spontaneously. I would have picked like something that was more neat and like that made more sense. And if I had done that, I now wouldn't have this really cool connection between two aspects of the story. The point I'm trying to make is that I thought I was becoming a plotter, and now I'm becoming a pantser again. I wanted to answer a couple of you guys' questions that you left on TikTok and on YouTube about the career change and me basically moving to Europe and deciding to fully invest myself in writing, leaving behind a career as a therapist. So one of you asked, out of curiosity, how long would it take for you to get licensed? I'm assuming as a psychologist in the country where you currently live. Honestly, I have no idea, and the reason why I don't know is because I don't think I will ever go back on my decision. Now, this career change is probably something I'll make like a full video about at some point, but you need to understand that this is a decision I came to over the course of several months, where each and every day I was getting closer and closer to realizing what I actually want to do with my life. There were a lot of factors that went into it. Some of them related to having a career in psychology, some of them related to my love for writing, and some of them related to me as a person. At the end of the day, I'm so sure that I do want to fully focus on being a writer that I don't know how long it would take for me to get licensed in this country. It's a non-issue for me. I was actually in the process of getting licensed in Washington because, as many of you know, I had just recently graduated and I was still under supervision. And so I was still working towards my license. But once I realized that I wanted to move to Europe and I wanted to focus on being a writer, I ended up canceling my application because you only really need a license as a psychologist if you want to work with clients. You don't need it if you want to teach. You don't need it if you want to provide psychoeducation on the internet. You don't need it if you're a researcher. You only really need it if you are providing clinical care to people. So I could technically do research or do teaching in Europe as well. But again, my focus is on writing right now, and probably for the rest of my life. I mean, it's interesting, if you go back to like old videos on my psychology channel, anytime you hear me talking about writing, I feel like it's so clear that this is the direction I was going down. I mean, you could hear me saying, yes, psychology is like the career that I've chosen to marry, but writing will always be my mistress. Or I would say, I never planned to have this audience, but now that I do, I hope that I can leverage that as an author. It was like I unconsciously knew this before I consciously was able to accept it about myself. And I don't care how many books I have to write, how many times I have to be rejected. I'm not going to give up on finding a literary agent and getting traditionally published ever. I'm going to keep going until I make it. And so I'm fairly confident that because I have this growth mindset, it's going to work out for me. Somebody else asks, what country do you live in? Europe looks very old to the house. I'm not going to be sharing this, and honestly, I wish I could share that aspect of my life with some of you guys, but the truth of the matter is that there are a few bad apples that ruin it for the rest of us. There are safety concerns that I have about sharing where I live in what country, because there are people out there that really do push boundaries and violate my privacy. And so, unfortunately, not going to be sharing that. Someone else says, would love to hear more about the career change. Currently thinking about changing my career for stability, but I don't want to give up on my dream. So I probably will need to make a whole video on the career change at some point, just because it's such a loaded and complicated story. It's definitely noted, and at some point when I'm ready, I probably will make that video. Wednesday was a travel day to the airport. Let's just say I stopped by a historical forest, and obviously I didn't get to write at all that day, but I did get to see some new places and had some tasty food. This was the view from the hotel airport the night before. The moon was quite full. It had a nighttime breeze coming in through the window, so it was actually quite nice. Then on Thursday, I boarded a very early flight to Bucharest. My cousin picked me up, and we went straight to the passport place to get some bureaucracy out of the way. After that, we had a big meal with family, and after that, my mom and I went to see a friend of mine who was my math teacher in high school, and she was Romanian, and she stayed friends with me. We had some drinks and appetizers with her at a nice hotel, and again, on Thursday, unfortunately, there was no time to write, but it was so nice to connect with loved ones. It has been quite a struggle to be able to write the past few days. I don't know if you can hear my family talking in the other room, but that's basically what it's been like for 3 days straight. And so I just managed to write 800 words today. That's the most I've managed to write since Tuesday. I think I need to rethink coming back home, because clearly I need to treat this like a vacation. Clearly it is not possible to do the same amount of work as I do when I'm in my own home. And it's kind of complicated because when you're self-employed, especially when your business is related to very passive income, you're in this strange spot where you do get paid even if you don't work. And yet, if you don't work enough days, at some point, you're going to stop getting paid and you don't get PTO, right? So it's like, even if I don't post a video one day, I might still get $60 from AdSense that day. But if I need to take a week off to move or to visit family, it's not like I get paid the same amount as I would if I were actually working during that time. I also wanted to just touch base with you guys about the future of my psychology channel and the future of my psychology content in general, because I think you could probably tell from this vlog that I'm moving a little bit further from psychology more towards writing, because that has always been my ikigai in life. That has always been the reason why I live. And I want to reassure you that my psychology content isn't going to go away, at least not for a while. However, I do plan on posting a little bit more infrequently on there, because 2 times a week is just too much for me. It is very overwhelming to come up with 2 topics every single week. And now that I live somewhere where cost of living is a little bit cheaper, I can maybe afford to do that a little bit and to just take a little bit of a breath rather than always be churning out content. Whereas before, I couldn't really do that. I couldn't afford to not post twice a week. Now, in the future, if I get a book deal, or if the majority of my income starts to come from writing, whereas now it's just, one of the many branches that income flows from, I probably will shift to a point where I only make psychology content when I really feel I have something I want to say, or I really have something that I want to look up. It's probably going to be a couple years until that's the case. I mean, knock on wood, if I get a book deal tomorrow, that would be fantastic. But I'm kind of in this weird limbo state right now. And I feel kind of strange opening up about the fact that I've decided to pursue writing full time, because I feel like some of the people who initially followed me for psychology content are now not going to be interested in what I have to say, or are going to feel like, oh, now that you're no longer a therapist, I don't care what you have to say about psychology. And I know rationally, like, okay, I spent a decade of my life studying psychology. I take part in continued education, even though I didn't decide to get licensed, even though I'm not practicing as a therapist anymore. I do probably more continued education than most people who are therapists and researchers have time to do. I read a ton of books on psychology. I read a ton of scientific articles on psychology. With that being said, I do kind of agree that the further away I get from my clinical experience and from my training, the less relevant it's going to be what I think about psychology. And when that time comes, I do hope to pivot to writing mainly full-time. It's strange. I feel like it's very vulnerable talking about these things because people don't always take it the right way when you change and when you decide to go in a different direction than what they initially knew you as. People get angry if they feel like they no longer have to benefit from the new version of you. I've experienced this in my personal life, and I expect to experience it online as well because, I mean, there are all kinds of opinions online. But I do still want to be frank about this because transparency is important to me, and I've never really been the type of person that shies away from self-disclosure if it could bring insight to people. And that's actually part of the reason why me continuing to have a clinical practice was not sustainable for me, because I constantly felt inauthentic in that role. Constantly felt like I needed to hide parts of myself because self-disclosure is a little bit frowned on in the field of therapy. And so now having the freedom to be open with you guys about these things does make me feel more authentic and more values aligned. Also, something I forgot to mention earlier in the vlog on the topic of deciding not to get licensed. I considered whether or not to still get licensed even though I didn't want to practice clinically. And part of the reason why I decided not to, in addition to the fact that I don't need to anymore because I'm not seeing clients, is that when you get licensed, the governing body does to some extent tell you what you can and cannot say and do. I'm not a person that would break ethics. However, there is always room for discrepancy between ethics codes and personal values and morality and legality. There are definitely places where there are some discrepancies. And there have been recent cases of psychologists who were basically slapped on the wrist for saying things that the governing body didn't agree with publicly. Now look, far be it from me to defend Jordan Peterson. But I am a little bit concerned about the precedent that disciplining him for what he says publicly on social media sets in terms of governing bodies being able to censor psychologists from giving their own personal opinions. I think just because you are a professional or have a certain degree or are a practicing or former therapist does not mean that you're not entitled to speak your truth and to speak up when you disagree with what the field of psychology considers to be objective truth at the moment. So part of the reason why I didn't want to get my license is because although I would never do anything unethical, and I hope to continue to uphold myself with professionalism and integrity, I don't need somebody having that power over me and the ability to tell me what I can and cannot say. If I disagree with what the APA, the ACA, or whoever has to say on something, I want to have the right to say that without being disciplined for it. So when you consider that, my freedom of speech, along with the fact that I do not need a license because I'm not practicing on clients anymore, there was just no reason for me to continue to try to get licensed. And honestly, it is incredibly liberating. I think if I were licensed, I would constantly be afraid of people trying to get me somehow. Any therapist or psychologist that's on the internet who's made a big name for themselves gets haters that report them for stupid shit. And in most cases, that doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go any further than that because the governing body realizes this is bogus. This person never even met this person. But I don't need the stress of somebody being able to do that. I don't need the stress of somebody even thinking they can get me that way. And it is truly so liberating because I can now do a makeup tutorial and not worry about, oh, how are clients going to perceive me? Is this going to change our dynamics? Or I can write a book without worrying about how clients are going to perceive whatever they learn about me in that way. Or I can state an unpopular opinion on the internet and not worry about backlash. I can do those things now, and nobody has the power to take that away from me. Now, freedom of speech is different from freedom of the consequences of your speech. I believe that if you say something that is insensitive or hateful or whatever it is, that other people have a right to say, hey, you can't enter this private business or this private establishment, or I'm going to tell you why I disagree with you, or I'm going to call you an asshole. Totally, that goes along with freedom of speech. But when you have somebody with power over you, such as a governing body, telling you you cannot say these sorts of things, that is censorship. That is the opposite of freedom of speech. Anyway, just wanted to touch base on that. And tomorrow is the last day of this week. I hope I can get a good amount of writing done, and I will see you at the end of this vlog. On Friday, I was really hoping to get back into writing, but more family stuff took priority. I did get a little bit of content creation busy work handled. I have a really special surprise coming on August 9th, so make sure you're subscribed to my newsletter if you want to find out as soon as it comes. But on Friday was another 0 words of writing day. On Saturday, despite all the clamor and the family all over, I managed to squeeze in a tiny bit of writing, just 800 words. And then I had another full day of family events, lots of kids around. It was super fun, just tons of laughter and love. And then on Sunday, my mom flew back to the States, so I was determined to write. It was finally a little bit of a quieter morning because there were fewer people in the house. I made myself some breakfast after a couple hours. The Romanian breakfast of champs, especially in the summer, is a tomato and cheese salad, so that's what I made myself. And then I wrote a little bit more, and at the time of writing this, I've written 1,700 words. Maybe I'll do a little bit more later, but as of right now, I'm working on finalizing this vlog. Allow me to just end with a little bit of a recipe from my grandma on how to cook trout.
Un pat de ceapă aici, uite așa, o roșie tocată așa. Și acum am pus pe deasupra sare și pun usturoi cu lămâie peste el și ulei și îl bag la cuptor.
Și asta verde ce?
Piper, asta verde e ardei.
Nu știu de ardei. Asta e piper?
Piper și mărar.
Thank you so much for watching this vlog. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you enjoy more writer, author content that will be coming in the future. If you've been considering buying my debut novel, The Curse in Their Veins, now would be a really awesome time to do that. A lot has been going on, so if you've been considering it, much appreciated. And if you have read The Curse in Their Veins, I'd really appreciate a review as well. Thank you so much to everyone who's watched this far, and I'll see you soon.